A very warm greetings to everyone. Hi, I am Jaishree of VLLV 8A and I'm here to present my labor law assignment, and my topic for the same is the health provisions under the Factories Act 1948. Now, before moving to the health provisions, let's just discuss what is health and why it is important. So, health. The definition given by the World Health Organization is health is a state of a complete physical, mental, social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Now, moving on to the importance of health and the health provisions. Why do actually we need health provision in the Factories Act? So, the health can affect our job productivity. So, the government has responsibility for the health of their people, which can be fulfilled by the provisions of the adequate health and the social measures. The enjoyment of the highest attainable standards of the health is the one's fundamental right of every human being. The health of all people is fundamental to attainment of peace and security and is dependent on the fullest of the cooperation of individual as well as state. Now, why do we need health provision under the Factories Act? So, I want to start with it a quote. Health isn't expensive, it's priceless. Why? Why is it so? So, health is an important part of everyone's life. It's important part of my life, it's an important part of your life, and every person who's surviving, the health plays a vital role in their every day-to-day life. So, being healthy does not only mean disease-free, it includes physical, social, and mental health too, which I discussed in the previous slide as well. So, maintaining a sound health is undoubtedly concern of everyone out there, but it is more necessary for those who are constantly under threat of health hazard. Who are they? Yes, they are the factory workers. So these are the factories workers. They are constantly under the danger of the health risk. Hence, it becomes necessary to concentrate on their health, on the health of workers. It becomes necessary, isn't it? Yes, it becomes necessary to concentrate on the health of the workers in the factories as well as in the people who are living in the society near that particular factory or as in the society, right? In order to standardize the health measures and the safety provisions, the Factory Act lays down the certain health measures. Now, moving towards the health provisions mentioned under the Factories Act, the Chapter 3 of the Factories Act 1948 deals with the provisions related to the health. It contains total 10 sections starting from the section 11 to section 20. What section 11 deals with? The section 11 deals with the guidelines. What are these guidelines and what is section 11? The section 11 deals with the guidelines provided for the cleanliness. It has two subsections. Subsection 1 deals with the guidelines or provides the guidelines, and if we talk about the subsection 2, which enables the state government to take some order or exempt any factory if it's not able to comply with the provisions given in the subsection 1 of the section 11 of the Factories Act only. What is subsection 1 of the section 11? So it provides guidelines. So what are these guidelines and what kind of guidelines subsection 1 of section 11 provides? So the subsection 1 of section 11 deals with the guidelines and provides the guidelines for the cleanliness or for maintaining the cleanliness in the factory. For say, accumulation of dirt shall be removed daily by sweeping or any other effective method. Next, it also provides like if a workroom shall be cleaned at least once in a week by washing or using any kind of disinfectant. If we talk about the drainage system, it also mandates the drainage system or effective drainage system in the factory. And if we talk about the walls, partitions, ceilings, rooftops, staircases, or any passage, windows, doors available in the factory should be varnished, whitewashed, and it provides the specific timelines and the time period. In that particular time, the occupier should do or redo the walls, ceilings, rooftops, and passage and staircases should be varnished or whitewashed. Now, if we talk about the subsection 2 of the section 11, so it provides the state government some powers so that it can exempt some factories, some class or description of factories. Why do state government can do this? So it is not possible for the occupier to comply with all the provisions or any of the provisions of mentioned under the subsection 1. Then in that case, the state government may take order to or exempt such factories or class or description of the factories from this particular thing. Now, moving on to the section 12 of the Factories Act, which deals with the disposal of the waste and effluents. Now, section 12 have two subsections. Subsection 1 of section 12 talks about the effective arrangements that should be made to treat the effluent and waste which is occurring in the factory due to the manufacturing process. And if we talk about the subsection 2 of the section 12, then it empowers the government to exempt if any factory is not complying with that particular subsection 1 of section 12, then the state government have power to exempt that particular factory and provide some other guidelines to maintain the effluents and the waste which is occurring in the factory due to the manufacturing process. If we talk about the section 13, then it have three subsections. So now subsection 1 talks about, before moving to the subsection 1, let's just discuss what is subsection is talking about. Section 13 is talking about. So section 13 is talking about the ventilation and temperature. Now, moving towards the subsection 1 of the section 13. So now it provides the guidelines to maintain the adequate temperature and ventilation in the factory. It provides the guidelines like what should be the temperature, how should be the roof and walls material of to be made of to maintain the moderate temperature and the adequate ventilation in the factory. Now moving towards the subsection 2 of the section 13. Now, subsection 2 talks about the government powers. The state government and the authority have the power to make guidelines, further guidelines, or some additions or subtractions to the guidelines to maintain the adequate temperature and the ventilation in the factory. Now, if we talk about the subsection 3, so, subsection 3 of section 13 enables a chief inspector to inspect the factory and suggest some measures to maintain the temperature and ventilation in the factory or the rooms of the factory which he may thinks that appropriate for the factory. Now, moving on to the section 14, which talks about the dust and fume. So, now it has two subsections. Subsection 1 talks about like how to prevent the factory workers from the inhalation of the injurious and the offensive smoke or dust or fume which is occurring in the factory due to the process of manufacturing something. And the subsection 2 talks about the restrainment of use of the combustion engine. And it also states that the subsection 2 also states that if there is a need or it is necessary to use a combustion engine, then it should be in a separate room or it should be away from the workers who are working in the factory so that the health of the workers should be preserved. Okay. So moving on to the section 15, which talks about the artificial humidifications, it provides provisions and guidelines for maintaining the humidity level in the air in the factories. It has three subsections. Subsection 1 talks about the guidelines and it provides the provisions for maintaining the humidity level. It also sets standards that what should be the humidity level in the factory, proper ventilation and water usage should be done properly in the factory. It also provides some tests which should be taken eventually to maintain the or to test the humidity level which is ongoing in the factory. This and several other provisions for and guidelines provided under the subsection 1. Now moving on to the subsection 2, which states that the water used for the purpose shall be taken from the public supply or other source of drinking, other sources of drinking. Now, if we talk about the subsection 3, so if it appears to the inspector that the water which is used in the factory is requires an effective purification, or which is mentioned under the subclause 2 which we discussed recently, then what he can do is, so he can suggest some other measures and set a deadline to fulfill those guidelines to maintain the specific level, or a particular level of humidity in the factory. So basically subsection 3 enables the inspector to inspect the factory for maintaining a particular humidity level in the factory to save the health of the factory workers who are working in the factory from the humidity. Okay, now moving on to the subsection 6. Now moving on to the section 16, which suggests overcrowding. Like, it provides guidelines to maintain a particular crowd in the factory, which says, which says no to overcrowding. So now, section 16 have four subsections. Subsection 1 states that no room shall be overcrowded to an extent that it should injured the health of the workers who are working in the factory. Now, subsection 2 states some cubic meter, which is 14.2 cubic meter for every worker which is working in the factory. Not more than that. Earlier, it was something around 9.9 cubic meters, but later on, it became 14.2 cubic meter for each worker to work in that factory, or who are working that or working in the factory. Now moving on to the subsection 3, which talks about the power of inspector. Inspector, if inspector feels like that this limit is crossing the overcrowding limit, then he may suggest the maximum number of workers who can work in the factory and set a deadline to increase a space, or rest he can state the factory or the occupier to less the number of the workers who are working in the factory. And if we talk about the subsection 4, then it provide the exemption powers to the inspector. Now, here what an inspector can do is exempt a factory if it finds deemed to fit for the workers or the occupier or the room space. There are several factors who plays a vital role in here. So if he feels like it is perfectly fine, then he can allow the factory or the workers to work in that particular factory. Now moving on to the section 17, which talks about lighting, and it has four subsections. Now, moving on to the section 17 of the Factories Act, which deals with the lighting. So, the section states, firstly, there should be proper lighting in all the places of the factory from where the workers of the factory pass. In every factory, provisions shall, so far is practicable, be made for the prevention of 1. Glare, either directly from a source of light or by reflection from a smooth or a polished surface. And the next, the formation of shadows to such an extent to cause eye strain or the risk of accident of the workers. Now moving on to this section 18, which deals with the drinking water. So this section states that in every factory there should be proper arrangements for the sufficient supply of the wholesome drinking water and shall be legible marked as drinking water, because water is life. Nothing is possible without water. So drinking water is equally important for the health of the workers who are working in the factory. Now moving on to the section 19 of the Factories Act, which deals with the latrines and the urinals. So this section states that every factory should make arrangements of latrines and the urinals for the employees and make rules. And the rules are laid down by the state government in his in this behalf. So this section states that every factory should make arrangements for the latrines and urinals for the employees, and the rules are laid down by the state government in this behalf. This section states that every factory should make arrangements of latrines and the urinals for the employment, and the rules are laid down by the state governments in this behalf. Now, last section of this chapter, which deals with the spittoons, there. So, section 20 is there, which deals with the spittoons. Now, there should be a sufficient number of spittoons in the factory for the employees, and they should be clean and hygienic in condition according to this law. Now, moving on to the conclusion. Now, I would like to conclude my topic or my question, which I arose in the very beginning, like why do we need health provisions under the Factories Act? So, various factories do not provide an adequate working conditions of workers, which cause several diseases to the workers, and this will also create a danger to the working class of the factory. So, the safety and health are very important for the workers. Employees have to do their duty, not to see the chance to escape their duty. Hence, we need the health provisions in the Factories Act. And now I would like to end my presentation on the quote, which I also mentioned in the presentation, which is health isn't expensive. Health isn't expensive, it's priceless. Thank you.